What if the creature you saved came back 40 years later to save you? Silas Boone, a reclusive 68-year-old ex-forest ranger, has spent decades in silence, haunted by a secret no one believed. But when a massive, fur-covered figure appears on video, gently placing an injured animal at a ranger station before vanishing into the snow, his world shatters. A scar on the creature's shoulder matches one Silas remembers from the day he rescued what he believed was a young Bigfoot. The truth no one dares to say: Bigfoot isn't a myth. He remembers. He's grateful. Now, with his daughter Callie, a primate researcher, Silas returns to Bitterroot, the sacred forest where legend whispers of a guardian in the trees. What they find are signs only Silas and the creature could understand. And then, in the mist, Bigfoot appears. No growl, no threat, just silence. And a kneel. A giant hand, caked in forest soil, rests gently on Silas's crippled knee. Not the touch of a beast, but of something that remembers a debt. The world saw it. Cameras didn't, but hearts did. This isn't just a reunion. It's redemption, discovery, and the quiet end of a man's long, painful waiting. Don't wait until all that's left in Bitterroot are gunshots and footprints fading in snow, because if you miss this story, you may never know who Bigfoot truly is. I didn't believe it at first. Not when I saw the video. Not when the clip hit 5 million views overnight. Not even when my phone buzzed with alerts from colleagues asking, "Is this real?" It was just another grainy, shaky, too perfect to be true upload at 2:12 a.m., probably faked with some prosthetic costume and a fog machine. The title didn't help either. Real Bigfoot caught returning injured deer. Bitterroot lookout station. But the moment I paused it at the 47-second mark, something inside me caved. The creature, if that's what we're calling it, had stopped moving. It stood at the edge of a ranger's cabin, shoulders hunched, framed by a wall of mist. Its hands, massive and dark and rough like bark soaked in rain, lowered something to the ground. A mule deer, legs bloodied, ribs rising and falling, barely breathing. Then, the thing turned. Not toward the camera, but slightly to the left, as if it knew it was being watched. And that's when I saw it. The scar. A crescent-shaped scar curling over its left shoulder blade. Jagged, pale, healed, but not clean. Exactly like the one my father described, over and over again, for 40 years. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at my desk, blinking at the paused frame, the grain dancing like dust in sunlight. And for the first time in my adult life, I thought, maybe my father wasn't losing his mind after all. I pulled his old journal from the bottom drawer. It still smelled like pine sap and old leather. The page he bookmarked with a feather was wrinkled, water-stained. I read it by the light of my laptop. The words shaky but sure, "May," fell from the ledge at dusk. My leg snapped below the knee. I could see the bone. Thought I'd die there. But then it came. I didn't scream. It didn't growl. Just looked at me. Eyes like wet earth. It was young, hurt, limping. Its left shoulder had been gashed by something mean. I reached for it. It didn't run. It stayed. I think we saved each other. I must have read that paragraph 100 times as a kid. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every time I caught Dad staring too long out the window. Nobody believed him, of course. Not the Forest Service, not the doctors, not even Mom. But he never changed the story. Not once. And now, 40 years later, I was staring into the eyes of that same impossible thing. Only older, heavier, and somehow gentler. Dad couldn't move much these days. Stroke last winter. Left side paralyzed. The house always smelled like liniment and quiet frustration. When I showed him the video on my phone, he didn't blink. Just reached up with his working hand and pressed a finger to the scar. Not on the creature, on the screen. His eyes went glassy, but his voice came out clear. If it's still alive, then it remembers. He said it like a fact, not a hope. I spent the next week digging into the footage. It had been uploaded by a backpacker named Ellis Cord. Trail camera caught the whole thing. Motion triggered. He didn't want credit. He didn't even want to talk. Said he posted it, then went offline because, quote, it felt wrong keeping it to myself. The timestamp placed it near Raven Lookout, Bitterroot Wilderness, Montana. That was the place. The same one Dad had patrolled in '84. The same trail where he broke his leg in a landslide and wasn't found for 3 days. And the same spot where he claimed something massive and wounded, had kept him alive. He used to call it the land of the Watcher. Said the old Salish people told stories about a being that only showed itself in the melt season, when the rivers ran loud and the trees shed their secrets. Everyone thought he was just poetic. But that was before the footage. That was before the scar. That was before I saw a ghost from my father's past kneel beside a dying deer and vanish into the fog like it had always belonged to another world. I booked 2 tickets to Montana the next day. Dad didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. Just nodded once and said, "Get me as close as you can. The rest, I'll crawl if I have to." I started packing that night, pulled his old ranger badge from the shelf, slipped the journal into my duffel. I don't know what I expected to find back there. A footprint, a tuft of hair, a silent ridge with nothing left but memories. But I knew this. If that creature was real, if it had come back after all these years, then maybe it wasn't just returning a wounded deer. Maybe it was returning to him. And maybe, just maybe, he deserved the chance to say goodbye. We left before dawn. The road out of Missoula was still half-iced, patches of snow clinging to the pines like ghosts refusing to melt. Dad sat beside me in the van, wrapped in that old green parka he always wore when I was a kid, the one that still smelled like cedar and sweat and rain. He didn't talk much, just stared out the window, jaw clenched, eyes scanning the treetops like he was looking for something he'd buried in another life. I glanced down once. He was gripping the edge of his chair so tight his knuckles turned white. "Still hurts?" I asked. "No," he said quietly. "It remembers. That's what I feel." Outside, the forest thickened. Sunlight filtered in pale shafts between the branches. And somewhere, deep beyond the road, something moved that didn't belong to any map. I felt it too, like the land itself was watching us come home. We reached Bitterroot right as the thaw began. Not the kind of thaw you read about in forecasts. The kind that comes from the ground groaning beneath snowdrifts, from pine trees shaking off weeks of silence, from rivers clawing through ice like they're trying to remember how to move again. The forest didn't look the way it had in Dad's photographs. It looked older, wilder, hungrier somehow, and still, it welcomed him. We parked just shy of the old Forest Service boundary. The newer trails didn't go far enough in, and the ranger who'd granted us access warned about landslides and fallen bridges. None of that stopped Dad. He sat in the passenger seat, his right hand gripping the armrest, left side stiff and useless, but his eyes scanning the horizon like a man returning to something unfinished. "This was all open once," he murmured. "Fire road ran right up through that ravine, back when the trees weren't so thick, back when I had 2 good legs." I loaded his chair from the back, eased him into it, and we started slow. The trail was no longer a trail. The forest had taken it back. Roots cracked through what was once packed gravel. Shrubs clawed at our sleeves. Sometimes the path disappeared entirely, and I had to guide his wheels over half-buried rocks, balancing one hand on his shoulder to keep him steady while he whispered directions like he still remembered every damn turn. "We used to call this place Widow's Spine," he said. "Slippery as sin in the rain. One wrong step and you'd be down 50 feet. "Sounds like a great place for a patrol," I muttered. He chuckled, the first laugh I'd heard from him in weeks. "No one wanted the Bitterroot sector. Too remote. Too quiet. They gave it to the rookies. Said it'd toughen you up. I think it just gave me too much time to see things nobody believed." I glanced back at him. He wasn't looking at me, just straight ahead, like he was seeing something layered over what was really there. The ghosts of trees. a trail worn down by boots that hadn't walked it in decades. By the time we reached the ledge, the sun was low and the wind had shifted. Colder, wetter. Like snow still lingered just out of sight, waiting to slide down the mountain when no one was watching. I recognized the place from the journal. The narrow spine of rock, the break in the ridge wall, and below it, the place he fell. I looked at him. He didn't blink. His fingers curled against the armrest. "This is it." He pointed, a jagged line of moss-covered stone, a slash of earth torn away by time. I was there, just below that lip. My boot slipped. I heard the bone snap before I hit bottom. Couldn't move. Couldn't scream loud enough for the radios to pick up. I thought, that was it. He didn't say more, but I didn't need him to. I'd memorized those journal entries as a girl. Night fell fast. No stars. I passed out once from the pain. Woke to something sniffing at me. Thought it was a bear. Then I heard it breathe. Slower, heavier. It didn't growl. It just stood there, watching. I passed out again with its shadow still draped over me like a blanket. I stepped forward, past the crumbling ledge, and crouched. The dirt had shifted here. Not fresh, but recent. Like the land had been disturbed in the last few days. I brushed back a layer of pine needles and spotted the edge of something soft. Brown, fibrous. I pulled gently. A clump of hair. Not fur, not feathers. Hair. Coarse, thick, the color of old tree bark, matted with what looked like dried blood. I didn't say anything at first. Just held it in my gloved palm, the way you might hold something sacred. My chest tightened. The wind blew again, this time harder, and I turned. And froze. There were footprints behind the chair. Not mine, not Dad's. 4 of them, wide, deep, pressed into the frost-hardened soil in a slow circle around the chair. As if something had come in the night, circled him, paused, and left again. I felt the back of my neck prickle. Every sound, the groan of trees, the drip of snowmelt, the hum of wind through pine needles, became louder, sharper. I didn't tell him right away. I didn't want to scare him. But when he asked to get out of the chair and touch the earth again, I didn't argue. I helped him lower himself onto the moss-covered stone, where the sun now cast long golden streaks through the trees. He didn't speak for a while, just laid his palm flat against the ground. The wind stilled. So did the forest. And then I heard him say, quiet, almost to himself, "I didn't think I'd ever be back. Not like this." He looked down at the moss, his fingers trembling. He pressed them into the green. This was the last place I saw it. When I couldn't move, when I thought the pain would end me. It stood there just beyond that fallen log, limping, bleeding. But it looked at me like it knew I was more scared of it than it was of me. He lifted his hand, traced a circle in the dirt. I called to it, I don't know why. Maybe I was just lonely. Maybe I thought I was dying. But it came. It stood beside me for hours, didn't make a sound. He paused. His voice broke just enough to remind me how long he'd carried this. I don't know if it saved me, or if being seen, just being seen, was enough. I crouched beside him, opened the journal, and found the entry. The pages were stiff, some words blurred by age, but I read them anyway. Day 3, still alive, still watching me. It hasn't left. We're both injured. Maybe that's why it stays. Maybe it knows what it's like to be helpless. I closed the book. The light shifted. A bird shrieked in the distance, sharp and sudden. Dad looked toward the sound, then back at the ridge. "We're not alone out here," he said. I didn't know if he meant animals, memories, or something else entirely. But I felt it too. A presence. Not hostile, just heavy, like the weight of an old promise still hanging in the air. And when we started our way back down the trail, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Not out of fear, out of a feeling that something was walking just out of sight, keeping pace, waiting. It started just before dawn, in that blue hour where the sky forgets its name and everything feels like it's holding its breath. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, that makes you aware of every drop of moisture in the air, every twig that hasn't cracked yet. I was the first one awake. Couldn't sleep. The cold had crept into the corners of the tent, and my back ached from too many nights on uneven ground. I unzipped the flap just enough to see the fog curling between the trees, thick, dense, moving slow, like it had somewhere it needed to be. That's when I heard it. A breath, one, then another. Not fast, not shallow. Deep, measured, heavy enough to feel, not just here. It didn't come from far off. It was right there, just beyond the ring of damp ash and firewood. Not rustling, not pacing, just breathing. I didn't wake Dad. Not at first. I stayed frozen, fingers curled tight around the sleeping bag, pulse in my throat. I listened. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. And still, the breathing, always just beyond sight. Never moving closer, never going away. When the sun finally cracked through the fog, just a whisper of pale yellow cutting through the gray, it stopped. I climbed out and walked slow. Each step felt too loud, too real. Nothing was out of place, except everything was. Around the tent, in the wet moss, in the soft, shivering mud, were footprints, not boot tracks. Not bare, wider, flatter, longer, 4 of them. No claws, no shoe treads, just weight and pressure, pushed deep into the earth. Like it had walked in a slow circle around the tent and stopped right next to Dad's chair. He hadn't woken up. That's what shook me most. The thing had stood there, breathing over us while we slept. I knelt beside the prints, heart pounding so hard I thought the trees might hear it. I reached down, touched the edge of one. Cold, still damp, still sinking. Whatever it was, it had been real. I looked over at the pine just beyond the fire ring. One of its branches was broken, not snapped by wind, not rotted. Twisted downward with strange intention, still hanging. The break wasn't random. It curved into the shape of a C. I stared at it for a long time. Dad used to do that when I was a kid. Snap branches into signals on the trail. C for camp, C for calm, C for creature. I didn't think much of it back then. Just an old ranger's habit. But now it felt like something else had picked up the language. I didn't know how to tell him. So I waited until he woke, made coffee, helped him into his jacket. Let the morning warm a little before I spoke. There were tracks, I said. He didn't flinch. Where? Right around the tent. He looked at me, eyes heavy but sharp. Did it leave anything else? I hesitated, then pointed to the branch. His expression didn't change, but I saw something ripple behind his eyes. He wheeled himself over, reached out, and gently touched the break in the wood. His fingers trembled, not from the stroke, but from something older, something deeper. I used to mark it that way, he said, voice low. When I saw it last, I left a trail, not for rescue, for it, in case it came back. He let out a breath that sounded like part of him had been holding it for years. It remembered. Later that afternoon, I set up the thermal cam. Motion triggered. Standard tech. Nothing fancy. I placed it facing the slope beyond the camp, near where the trees opened into a narrow clearing. Dad said that's where he last saw it, 40 years ago. Limping through the snow, blood drying against its ribs. He called it the echo that watches, said it never made a sound. That night, sleep came like fog, creeping, refusing to settle. I woke up 3 times, once to the sound of an owl, once to silence so loud it made my ears ring, and once to the absence of anything at all. Just after 3 a.m., the air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just different. I sat up, held my breath, listened. No wind, no night birds, just a stillness that felt thick enough to chew through. The breathing didn't come back, not this time. But something else did. I checked the thermal cam right after sunrise. The footage was short, maybe 20 seconds, but I'll never forget it. The frame lit up slowly, fog rolling in like smoke. Then, on the far edge, A shape. Massive. Too still to be wind, too grounded to be shadow. It didn't move, just sat, facing the camp, like it had been there all night, waiting for us to notice. I showed Dad the footage. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the screen, jaw clenched tight. Then he closed his eyes. "It's not hiding," he whispered. "It's waiting." "For what?" He opened his eyes and looked at me. No fear, no doubt. "For us to answer." He pointed to the screen. "That's not a warning, that's a mirror." I didn't understand it then, but I think I do now. Because as the days went on and the forest drew us deeper in, I began to feel it too. A rhythm beneath the trees. A presence not watching to threaten, but to remember, to remind. And just like Dad wrote all those years ago, the journal pages wrinkled, ink bled by rain and time. I called it once, not with words, not with fear, but with something inside me that knew what it meant to be alone. And it came. It didn't roar. It didn't run. It just stayed. And somehow, that was enough. The branch still hangs near camp, still bent into that quiet C. A letter no animal would understand. A symbol no hunter would leave. And when I walk past it now, I swear the wind hums around it, not sharp, not cold, just a low murmur, like breath, like memory, like something vast and silent that hasn't stopped listening. It didn't happen in the way stories usually tell it. There was no thunder, no distant howl, no camera shaking in my hands. It was morning. Fog still stitched between the trees, thick and wet. The light was the kind that barely touches anything, silver and thin, as if the world hadn't quite agreed to be awake yet. Dad was sitting just outside the tent, wrapped in that old military wool blanket with the frayed hem. His breath came out in slow clouds. I was boiling water for coffee. The fire hadn't caught well, too damp, but the air was so still, so heavy. I could hear the flame trying. It popped once, twice, then fell quiet. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were doing that thing where they fill in shapes between trees. Pareidolia. Familiar shadows pretending to be things they're not. But then it shifted, just slightly. A shoulder, the lift of a chest, the hint of steam rising from its skin. It was massive, covered in matted fur the color of wet cedar bark. Shoulders sloped forward, long arms almost reaching its knees. Its legs weren't bent like a bear's. They were straight. Human. But the movement wasn't human at all. Too slow, too still. It stood just past the tree line, on the slope we'd marked the day before, watching us. I didn't say a word. I didn't even breathe. I just backed up, one step, then two, and knelt beside Dad. He already knew. He was staring straight ahead, hands clenched in his lap, eyes fixed on that space between the pines like it was the end of something. "It's here," he said, quiet and steady. And then, as if the air had made a decision, it stepped forward. I wish I could explain the way the world felt when it moved. The way the wind backed off. The way the birds went silent again. It wasn't like watching an animal. It was like watching a memory return with its own heartbeat. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It walked. Each step was slow, heavy, but careful, deliberate. And with every inch it crossed, I felt something in me collapse. All the doubt, all the disbelief, all the noise that had tried to explain this thing away. It didn't belong to any documentary. It didn't belong to science. It belonged to him. When it reached the edge of our camp, no more than 15 feet away, it stopped. Dad didn't move. I could hear his breath, shallow and fast. But his face was still. The creature tilted its head. Its face was broad, not ape, not man. Something in between, not wild, not tame. Its eyes weren't red. They didn't glow. They were soft, dark. The kind of eyes you'd see on something that had lived long enough to understand pain. They locked onto Dad. And then it did something that neither of us could have imagined. It knelt, right there in the mud, This enormous being bent one leg, then the other, and lowered itself onto its knees. Not fast, not ceremonial, just quiet. It brought its hand forward, massive, weathered, scarred, and laid it gently across Dad's leg. No sound, no growl, no demand. Just that, a touch. I saw Dad's hand rise, slowly, shaking. His fingers hovered for a moment, then rested on the edge of the creature's fur. His voice cracked when it came. "You're still here," he whispered. And then, softer, "You remember." The creature closed its eyes, one slow blink. And then, I swear, a tear formed in the corner of its right eye. Not fast, not dramatic. It rolled down its cheek like sap dripping from the edge of a wounded tree. Nobody moved. Ezra, the field tech who'd joined us 2 days earlier, stood frozen behind the tent. The ranger assigned to escort us had gone dead quiet. No one reached for a phone. No one recorded a thing, because none of us wanted to interrupt what was happening. This thing, this myth, this story wrapped in fur and silence, had come back. Not to threaten, not to haunt, but to kneel, to thank, to remember the man who once stayed with it through a night of pain and fear 40 years ago, on a ledge of broken rock and blood-soaked snow. Dad leaned closer, still holding onto the fur. His fingers curled slightly. Then he breathed out, slow, like it hurt. "I thought I was hallucinating that night," he said. "But you were real. You've always been real." The creature didn't reply. It didn't need to. Because the way it stayed there, the way it bowed its head ever so slightly, it said everything. Dad wiped his eyes. "It's okay," he murmured. "You can go." But it didn't, not yet. It stayed there a few seconds longer, as if memorizing his face. Then it stood, again slowly, and stepped backward into the fog without turning. As it vanished, its head dipped once more. Not out of fear, out of recognition. We sat in silence for a long time. I couldn't speak. Neither could Dad. When I finally did, my voice came out like sandpaper. "Did you ever think this would happen?" He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at me, and there was something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. "Peace. I always hoped it would," he said. "Not for proof, just to know I wasn't alone in that memory." I opened his journal that night. The oldest pages were brittle. The ink faded. But I found the entry. It stood beside me when I couldn't move. It didn't speak. It didn't leave. Just stayed long enough for me to know I wasn't dying unseen. That kind of mercy. It's not something you forget. I don't know what it is, but I know what it gave me. I pressed my fingers to the page. Outside the tent, the fog still moved. The trees still leaned in like they were listening. And somewhere out there, not far, I swear I could still feel it. Not gone, not lost, just watching. Still. It didn't take long for the video to surface. Not ours, not Ezra's, not even from the thermal cam we'd hidden in the brush. It was some shaky, zoomed-in, badly compressed footage from a hiker's phone, shot from across the ridgeline the morning after the encounter. A shadow behind fog, a glimpse of something too tall, too broad, stepping into the trees. They captioned it with fire. "Real Bigfoot returns to Bitterroot. Footage verified." 2 hours later, it hit 1 million views. By sundown, the trucks started rolling in. Satellite vans, gunmetal gray pickups with antenna rigs, men with vests and long lenses and sharper eyes than sense. They didn't come to listen. They came to capture something. Some came for clicks. Others came for blood. Dad stayed quiet. He watched it all from the edge of the camp, mouth tight, jaw flexing every time a new stranger passed by, pretending not to look at him. They brought drones. They brought motion sensors. Someone even tried baiting the trailhead with raw meat. The quiet of the forest shrank back like an animal cornered. We stopped hearing birds. We stopped hearing anything. And just like that, he was gone. Not a sound, not a trace. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. Like the forest swallowed him whole. ashamed of ever letting us see what it was trying to keep. I begged the ranger station to shut the access roads. They said it was public land. I asked them to enforce illegal baiting. They said it wasn't their jurisdiction. By the end of the week, someone set off a flare near the creek bed. The smoke curled above the ridge like a scream you can't silence. That's when I found the blood. It was near Lake Kestrel, not far from the southern basin. Ezra and I were circling back from the waterfall bend when we saw it. A long red streak dragged across lichen-covered stone. Fresh, still wet. No carcass, no prints. Just a wide trail of red, as if something had staggered uphill, leaning hard on the rocks. We followed it. Every branch we passed had been grazed, bark torn in places, leaves brushed with rust. And then, maybe 20 yards deeper, we found the handprint. It was high up on the trunk of an aspen, almost too high for any man to reach without climbing. Wide, flat, 5 fingers, all smeared with blood. But it wasn't the handprint that stopped me. It was what came next. 2 lines, pressed into the bark below the print. Parallel, deliberate, not carved, marked. Dad taught me about symbols when I was little. Trail codes, ranger signs, tribal totems. He said the old ones used to leave messages in bark and stone for those who knew how to read them. 2 parallel lines, in Blackfeet and Silas traditions, meant I do not resist. I stared at it so long my eyes started to burn. It wasn't hiding. It was surrendering. Bleeding, injured, alone. And it had still chosen not to fight back. I showed Dad that night. He didn't cry right away. He just stared at the photo, silent. His thumb brushed over the image on the tablet screen, slow and trembling. Then I heard it. Not a sob. Just one soft inhale that sounded like a wound reopening. He spoke without lifting his head. I saved it once, he said. It could have left me there, could have walked away. But it didn't. It stayed. I waited. He looked up. And now it's the one backing down, because I'm here. He turned his face away then, not out of shame, out of grief. Not for himself, for it. Because whatever was left of that creature in the world, the one he'd met, helped, shared breath with, it was still choosing peace. Even now, surrounded by traps and rifles and the constant static of human noise. We went back to the tree the next morning. The handprint was still there, dry now, cracked and dark. The lines hadn't faded. Ezra and I searched the brush for more blood, more signs. A tuft of fur snagged on a bramble, a bent branch near the riverbed, a heel mark half filled with water. But the trail ended abruptly near the base of the cliff, where the ledge curved back toward the old fire line. That's where I found the shell casing. Small, brass, freshly fired. Not a hunter's round, not deer load, a tranquilizer. Military grade. Not for sport, not for conservation, for containment. We weren't the only ones who believed now. Someone had brought the wrong kind of attention, and he knew it. He was bleeding, but he was not fighting. He was avoiding us, still watching, still choosing. Dad kept writing in the journal every night. Not long entries, just phrases, sentences, thoughts. I read one later that made my chest go cold. You can love something without touching it, without naming it. You can stand back, let it walk into the dark, and still feel it in your bones. I didn't know what we were supposed to do next. I only knew we couldn't stay passive anymore. Because something ancient, something kind and brutal and sacred, was out there, wounded, hunted, surrounded, and still refusing to become the monster they wanted to see. And that kind of grace, that kind of choice, that doesn't come back twice. Not in this world, not in ours. Not unless we protect the silence it still trusts us to hear. We found him near the falls, not in the open, not collapsed in some dramatic pose beneath a shaft of golden light. No, he was half hidden behind a granite outcrop, just above where the stream curved inward and disappeared into a throat of pine. Ezra spotted the blood first, dark, thick trails leading from the edge of the water up the hill. I caught the smell second. Not rot, not death, just the dense, iron-heavy scent of pain. Dad was already out of his chair, crawling, his elbows red with dirt, his knuckles scraped, the wheels of the chair still spinning behind him. He hadn't said a word. Not when we lost the signal, not when the birds came back, not when the wind changed. It was instinct. Something in him recognized the silence that came before grief. I followed him up the ridge, breath caught in my chest. The trees closed in tight here, branches thick with moisture, pine needles blanketing the trail so deeply our boots made no sound. It felt like we were entering a church, or a grave, and there he was, folded against the rocks like a thing unfinished. His fur was matted with blood and dirt. Not fresh, not dry either. One arm was twisted beneath him at an unnatural angle. His chest rose slowly, each breath a mountain. The kind of breathing that tells you a body is trying to keep itself going long enough for something to arrive. Or someone. Dad reached him first, pulled himself those final inches through the moss and mud like a soldier crawling back to the place he first became human. He didn't speak. He just laid a hand, shaking, gnarled, against the side of that massive shoulder and closed his eyes. I saw something shift in the creature's ribs, not fear, not instinct. Recognition. Then the shot rang out. It cracked through the trees like a bone splitting in half. My body moved before my mind caught up. I threw myself sideways, grabbed Dad by the collar, dragged him behind the boulder. Ezra was already screaming. Something about elevation, about the trail above. But all I could hear was the echo of the rifle. Dad rolled out of my grip, swore once, then looked up. And then he did something I'll never forget. He turned back, dragged his body across the ground, pulling himself up by his palms, digging into the soil like a man who had forgotten he was broken. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask for help. He just crawled, slow, furious, toward the creature who had saved him once, and now lay dying with a bullet somewhere beneath his ribs. I followed. Behind us, Ezra shouted. Another shot cracked. But we didn't stop. The creature lifted its head, its face contorted, not in pain, in protection. Its arm came up, shielding Dad. It tried to rise, tried to stand between him and whatever was still hiding behind the trees. But its knees buckled, its breath caught. And then Dad did it. He pushed himself upright. For the first time in years, no help, no chair, no strength in his legs, just 2 fists full of pine needles and fury. And he stood. Just long enough to place himself between the creature and the gun. Just long enough to make eye contact with the man on the hill. That wild-eyed, camo-draped bastard who didn't even have the sense to lower his weapon. "Put it down!" I shouted. He didn't. His hand trembled. But he didn't. Then Dad raised both arms. No weapon, no threat, just his body. Old, ruined, unyielding, standing between something ancient and something stupid. The man on the ridge backed up, slow, stunned, his mouth working but saying nothing. Then he ran. Branches snapped, boots pounded into gravel, gone. And all at once, the world deflated. Dad dropped to his knees. The creature exhaled, a shuddering, hollow sound, and lowered its head into the crook of Dad's shoulder like a child giving in to sleep. I don't remember crying, but I must have, because when I blinked, the world was swimming. And in the middle of it all, my father sat cradling a thing the world refused to believe in. A myth, a ghost, a life. There's a line in his journal I've never been able to read out loud without my voice breaking. When I was 28, I bled into the forest and something watched over me. It didn't speak. It didn't comfort. It just stayed. And that presence, that witness, it gave me back the part of myself I'd started to lose. That day, in the hush that followed gunfire, with fog curling low and blood seeping into moss, I saw what he meant. It wasn't about proof. It wasn't about footage or science or names. It was about something else. Something neither man nor beast. Something older than language. Something that understood what it meant to suffer and still choose not to harm. Dad reached up once more, pressed his palm to that broad, matted forehead, and whispered the only thing that made sense. "Let me save you this time." No one moved for a long while. The wind carried ash and pollen in silence. The trees didn't speak, but they listened. We spent 3 days looking for him after the last encounter by the falls. No tracks, no blood, no more shell casings, nothing. It was like the forest had pulled him back into its chest and sealed the wound shut. Dad said nothing the first day, then less the second. By the third morning, he just sat staring at the tree line with that quiet, clenched stillness I'd only seen once before, when Mom died. There was this feeling in the air, like something had ended without permission, a conversation unfinished, a goodbye left half-written. I kept replaying the moment in my head. His body slumped, the way his breath caught when Dad touched his forehead, that awful sound like a dying tree groaning in the wind. I kept wondering if that was it, if I'd missed it, if I'd watched a legend bleed out behind a wall of pine and had been too human to stop it. But then we found the cave. It wasn't marked. No trail signs, no animal paths. Just a faint break in the ridge wall, hidden behind a wall of overgrowth. Ezra spotted it first, said the air was too still near that section of forest. And he was right. Even the birds stayed away from that bend in the trail. It wasn't fear, it was respect, reverence, like something sacred had passed through, and the world had decided to leave it alone. Inside, it was cold, not from air or stone, but from memory. The kind of cold that belongs to silence so deep you feel like you're trespassing on someone's grief. The light barely touched the back wall, but when it did, it hit something I hadn't expected. Prints, not one, several, small, uneven, some overlapping. I dropped to my knees without thinking, ran my fingers over the impressions. The front pads were wider than a bear's, the arch longer than any ape. I counted 6, then 8, then 10. Not just one being. More than that. A trail of generations, moving in and out. A family, and near the center of the floor, still damp with old moss, was the clearest print of all. His. It was deep, not from weight, from stillness. The way a body presses into the earth when it's been there a long time. I looked around. No bones, no fur, no blood. Just that one print, like a signature left at the end of something important. Dad sat just outside the entrance, unable to wheel himself into the slope. I came back out and knelt beside him, opened his journal, and placed his hand on the page. He didn't look at me, just whispered, "He's teaching them." I didn't understand it at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. That trail, those smaller prints, they weren't scattered. They were patterned, following his, paired with his, like they'd been walked together, not by accident, by guidance. We went back the next morning, left food, fresh cloth, water, things they might understand, things they might not. But when we returned hours later, everything was gone. Neatly, silently, except for a stone. Smooth, white, placed directly in the middle of Dad's jacket, like a gesture, or a thank you. 2 nights later, I saw it. Not him. Something else. Just past the tree line near the lower clearing where the brush thins and the trees open slightly into fog, I saw movement. I stood, didn't breathe, watched. It was smaller, maybe 4 feet tall, shoulders narrow, fur still patchy in places like a creature not yet finished with growing. It didn't run, just stood there watching me. Its head tilted once, the way he used to. That slow, weighted gesture like it was measuring something in the wind. Not fear, not confusion, understanding. I didn't raise a hand, didn't speak. I knew better by now, knew that some things were too sacred for noise. But I did nod, soft, the way Dad would have. The creature blinked. Then it turned, walked back into the mist, and vanished. It didn't come for food. It didn't come for help. It came to see me, and it left without taking anything but memory. Later that night, I found Dad rereading his old journal. His fingers hovered over a page I hadn't noticed before. The ink was faint, dated the year after his encounter, a year no one else had believed. If I were him, I wouldn't stay near men. Not after how we treated his kind. But maybe he's teaching them not to become us. Maybe he's showing them how to survive without becoming monsters. I read it 3 times. The 4th time, I had to stop. Because it wasn't just about survival. It was about legacy. This being, this creature born from stories and silence, had learned something most people never do. How to pass on grace. Not vengeance. Not hate. Not even warning. But forgiveness. Taught through action, through retreat, through that one final moment when a dying body still chose to shield my father from a bullet. It was in that cave, in the trail of prints, in the way the little one stood with its head tilted and never once looked afraid. He taught them how to remember. He taught them how not to hate. And in doing so, he reminded me what my father had always believed. That being seen, truly seen, without fear or expectation, was the closest thing we had to salvation. The last footprint we found that week was half hidden under fresh snow, just off the main trail. It was smaller than his, a little shallow, but unmistakable. And beside it, pressed into the ground like a message left for someone who would know how to read it, were 2 faint lines. Parallel, unbroken. And I swear I heard Dad whisper behind me as I stared down at it, his voice barely audible over the wind. He's still showing them the way. The snow came early that year. By the time October ended, Bitterroot was already under a quiet, white sheet. Not the kind of snow that blanketed for beauty, but the kind that silenced the forest, like nature was sealing something shut. Even the birds fell quiet. Ezra had gone home 2 weeks earlier. The researchers packed up days after. But I stayed. With Dad. He passed in the night. No pain. No last gasp. Just a long, slow breath by the cabin window, his blanket tucked around his chest, one hand resting on the windowsill as if still waiting for something to arrive from the tree line. I found him like that at dawn. Eyes closed, face soft. Not gone in fear, gone in peace. The kind of stillness you can't stage. You don't even know to expect it until the silence starts to echo. He looked like a man who'd just seen something important. I didn't cry. Not right away. I sat beside him for hours, let the coffee go cold, watched the trees for any sign, a flicker of movement, a trail of mist, the silhouette of a figure that didn't belong to the world we claimed to know. Nothing came, but I felt something, not near me, around me, a presence that didn't ask for space, just filled it. It wasn't until I stepped outside that I saw it. The snow was still clean. No wind-swept patches, no boot prints, but near the edge of the deck, no more than a foot from the cabin's threshold, was a single footprint. Massive, pressed deep, melted slightly at the center from heat. A right foot, toes splayed slightly outward. It faced the door. There were no other prints around it. No trail leading up, no trail leading away, just that one. Like whoever left it had stepped out of the forest and into time for only a moment, and then was gone. I stared at it for what must have been 20 minutes. The shape of it, the weight, the silence it carried. My breath made little clouds. The wind shifted just once. A single note of pine and snow, and something older than both. I stepped back inside. Everything was exactly where it had been. Dad still resting, the air still warm with wood smoke. But there was something under his cot, folded between the floorboards and the wool blanket I'd brought from the ranger post. A paper. Old, yellowing. A letter I hadn't seen before. Addressed in his handwriting. To me. No stamp, just my name. I unfolded it with hands I didn't realize were shaking. The ink was faded at the edges, like it had been written a long time ago and saved for this moment. If you're reading this, Callie, I guess I didn't get the words out while I was still above ground. You always said I waited too long to speak. You were right. But some things need to settle before they can be said. Some things only grow clear in the quiet. What I saw out here, all those years ago, I spent a lifetime thinking I saved it. But that wasn't true. It saved me, not from death, from something worse. From bitterness, from being alone inside my own skin. When it stood beside me, silent and bleeding, It gave me back the part of myself I thought was lost to the cold. And when it came back, when it remembered, I realized something. That whatever we call human doesn't belong only to us. It belongs to the ones who choose kindness even when they don't owe it. It belongs to those who kneel when they could have struck, who walk away when they could have hunted. That footprint you might find out there. That's not proof. That's a farewell. And a promise. Take care of yourself, kid. Keep listening to the woods. They still speak, and they still remember. I didn't cry until I reached the last line. And even then, it wasn't grief. It was something softer, a kind of breaking open. I folded the letter and placed it in his coat pocket. The same coat he wore the first time he told me about the thing in the woods. The same coat that had smelled like smoke and cedar and cold morning coffee my whole life. We buried him beneath the pine ridge that overlooked the southern basin. His old lookout spot. The one he said always made the sun seem closer. I carved no headstone, no marker. Just 2 long lines on a smooth piece of slate. Parallel, silent. Let the forest finish the rest. 3 days later, while packing the last of our gear, I walked out toward the clearing at the edge of the canyon. No particular reason. The wind was light. The snow had hardened in patches. I just needed air. That's when I saw it again. A figure, barely taller than my chest, standing at the base of a tree maybe 40 yards out. The same tilt of the head. The same soft weight in its stance. Its fur was cleaner this time. Its posture more upright. But the way it stood, still, without fear, told me everything. He had passed it on. The memory, the gentleness, the choice to remain unseen unless absolutely necessary. The creature blinked once, no movement, just watched, then turned, like the mist itself had come to fetch it, and vanished into the woods. No thunder, no fanfare, just a breath of wind and the faint trace of something warm in the snow where it had stood. I haven't gone back since, not because I'm afraid, but because I know I'm not forgotten. And neither was he. Sometimes, the most profound connections are the ones we never fully understand. The silent moments between 2 beings who don't share a language. The quiet choices made when no one is watching. The mercy given not because it's earned, but because it's right. This story was never about proving something exists. It was about remembering what it means to be. In a world that moves fast and forgets even faster, we often overlook the quiet truths hiding in the wilderness. Truths that don't scream for attention, but instead kneel in silence and wait to be seen. There is power in that kind of stillness. There is grace in choosing not to strike, in walking away when fear begs you to run, and in standing your ground not for pride, but for protection. This was a story about presence, about how witnessing something, truly witnessing it, can change the course of a life. About how sometimes what saves us doesn't roar or shine or break through the sky. Sometimes it simply stays. Stays in the dark with us. Stays when we're at our weakest. And teaches us that kindness, no matter how quiet, leaves a footprint deeper than fear ever could. There is a kind of sacred in things unspoken. A sacred in choosing to remember. In handing down something gentler than the pain we inherited. And if we're lucky, if we're listening, we just might carry those lessons forward into our own little corners of the world. So, wherever you are, if this story reached you, if it made you pause, breathe. Feel something. Thank you for letting it in. Thank you for honoring the silence between the lines. And if you believe there's still good in the unseen, still warmth in the wild, still something worth protecting in what can't be named, leave us a comment. Share your thoughts. Subscribe and follow the channel so more people can walk this trail with us. Your voice matters. Your presence matters. Let's keep telling stories that remember the things the world tries to forget. Until next time, stay human, stay listening, and stay kind.